There's a lake buried under 2 miles of Antarctic ice that hasn't touched sunlight or open air in over 15 million years. It's not the only one. There's an entire hidden world down there. Mountains, canyons, rivers, lakes, sealed away from the rest of the planet for so long that scientists aren't sure what they'll find when they finally reach it. Let's start with that lake, because its discovery almost didn't happen at all. In 1958, Soviet scientists were collecting seismic data across the frozen interior of East Antarctica. Nearly 2 decades later, in 1973, researchers flying radar equipment over the same region picked up something strange. A flat, mirror-like signal buried deep beneath the ice, the kind of reading you'd expect from open water, not solid rock. It took until the mid-1990s for scientists to confirm what they were looking at. A massive lake, roughly the size of Lake Ontario, sitting under nearly 2.5 miles of ice. They named it Lake Vostok, after the Russian research station sitting directly above it. Here's what makes Vostok almost impossible to comprehend. Estimates vary, but many researchers believe this lake has been completely sealed off from the atmosphere, from sunlight, from contact with the rest of Earth, for somewhere between 500,000 and 15 million years. While humans were evolving, while ice ages came and went, while entire species rose and vanished, that water sat in total darkness under a ceiling of ice, never once touching open air. Think about what that actually means. Every lake you've ever seen, every lake you've ever swum in has been touched by wind, by rain, by sunlight, by fish moving across its surface. Lake Vostok has had none of that. Not once. Not for longer than modern humans have existed as a species, by a factor of dozens. And it's not frozen. Despite sitting under one of the coldest places on the planet, geothermal heat rising from the Earth's crust keeps Lake Vostok liquid, hovering just below freezing. Which raises an obvious question. If there's liquid water down there, sealed away from the world for millions of years, could anything be alive in it? In 2012, a Russian team finally drilled down and reached the lake, after more than a decade of careful, incremental drilling designed to avoid contaminating the water below. It was one of the most technically delicate operations in the history of polar science. But their drilling fluid, a type of kerosene mixture, ended up contaminated with surface bacteria anyway, which meant nobody could be fully certain whether the organisms they later detected were native to the lake or accidental hitchhikers from the drill itself. It sparked a genuine fight in the scientific community, with many researchers arguing the sampling couldn't be trusted. A year later, in 2013, a separate American-funded expedition took a cleaner approach. Drilling into a different subglacial lake called Whillans using fully sterile techniques, they found something undeniable. Living microbes called chemolithoautotrophs. Bacteria that don't need sunlight at all. They survive by literally eating rock, breaking down minerals for energy in a place that has never seen a single photon of daylight. Later expeditions using similar sterile methods found more of the same at other subglacial lakes, entire microbial ecosystems running on chemistry instead of light, quietly surviving in total isolation. Lake Vostok isn't even rare. Scientists have now mapped more than 100 subglacial lakes hidden beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. Possibly connected to each other through hidden channels and cavities scientists still don't fully understand. Some may feed into one another. Others may have been isolated from every other body of water on Earth for so long that whatever lives in them has been evolving on its own, completely separately for millions of years. But the lakes aren't the strangest part of what's down there. Because underneath all that ice, there's also a mountain range. And this one shouldn't exist at all. In 1958, that same Soviet expedition that first hinted at Vostok also picked up something else entirely. Seismic readings suggesting a massive mountain range buried in the middle of East Antarctica, in one of the most remote, inaccessible places on the planet. They named it after Soviet geophysicist Grigory Gamburtsev. For 50 years, nobody could confirm what was actually down there. The location was simply too extreme to reach, sitting near what's called the Pole of Inaccessibility, the single hardest point on the continent to physically travel to. Then, between 2007 and 2009, a 7-nation research team flew radar-equipped aircraft over the region as part of an international polar survey. What they found stunned them. a mountain range roughly the size of the European Alps, stretching over 700 miles, complete with sharp, jagged peaks, deep valleys, and knife-edge ridges, buried under more than half a mile of ice. Picture that for a second. An entire alpine mountain range, the scale of something you could spend a lifetime hiking, sitting completely hidden, never seen by human eyes, never photographed, never climbed, existing only as a shape on a radar screen. Here's what's stranger. These mountains aren't supposed to look like that. The Gamburtsevs are ancient. Some estimates place their origins hundreds of millions of years old, tied to the breakup of an ancient supercontinent. Mountains that old should have been ground down by glaciers into smooth rolling hills over time, the way old mountain ranges elsewhere on Earth have flattened out. The Appalachian Mountains in North America, for comparison, are actually older than the Alps, and they look nothing like them anymore, worn down over hundreds of millions of years into low, rounded ridges. The Gamburtsevs should have gone the same way. Instead, they looked freshly carved, rugged, and sharp, like something a fraction of their actual age. It took researchers years to figure out why. The answer turned out to be the ice itself. In certain conditions, ice doesn't grind mountains down. It seals them. Where the ice freezes directly onto rock rather than sliding across it, erosion essentially stops. The glacier becomes a kind of preservation chamber, locking the landscape in place instead of wearing it away. One glaciologist studying the range put it simply, the question wasn't why the mountains were old, it was why they still looked so young. The Gamburtsevs weren't spared from time. They were frozen inside a moment of it, and they've stayed that way for tens of millions of years since. So now we've got a hidden mountain range and dozens of hidden lakes, both sealed away by the same ice sheet that covers 97% of the entire continent, which brings up the obvious question. What was Antarctica like before all of this happened? The answer might be the strangest part of the whole story. Antarctica wasn't always a frozen wasteland. Roughly 53 million years ago, this continent was covered in dense forest. Palm trees grew near what is now some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. Fossilized pollen and plant remains, pulled from sediment cores drilled off the Antarctic coast, show a warm, green landscape completely unrecognizable compared to the ice sheet sitting there today. Somewhere in the tens of millions of years since then, the climate shifted. The ice began accumulating, and by around 35 million years ago, glaciers had merged into the massive East Antarctic ice sheet we know now, quietly burying an entire ancient landscape, forests, mountains, water systems, and all under a lid of ice that has barely opened since. Which means everything scientists are finding down there, the lakes, the mountains, whatever ancient sediment or biology is locked inside them, isn't just a curiosity. It's a sealed time capsule of what this planet looked like before the ice took over. And there's a reason researchers studying these subglacial lakes keep bringing up other worlds entirely. Jupiter's moon, Europa, and Saturn's moon, Enceladus, are both believed to hide vast oceans of liquid water underneath thick shells of ice, in almost total darkness, cut off from sunlight in exactly the same way Lake Vostok has been. If microbial life can survive down there, eating rock instead of sunlight, in an environment humans only reached for the first time in 2012, then Antarctica isn't just a strange corner of our own planet. It might be the closest thing we have to a rehearsal for what we could eventually find somewhere else entirely, a natural laboratory for testing how life persists in the dark. Right now, less than a handful of these subglacial lakes have ever been touched by a drill. Every expedition costs millions of dollars, requires shipping heavy equipment across the most hostile terrain on the planet, and follows strict protocols designed to avoid contaminating an environment that has never been exposed to the surface. The rest of the 100+ known lakes remain exactly as they've been for millions of years, sealed, silent, and completely undisturbed. There's a whole continent under there, mountains as jagged as the Alps that no hiker will ever climb, lakes larger than some of the Great Lakes that no swimmer will ever enter, an entire landscape that existed before humans, before most of the ice ages, in some cases before our own species had even evolved. We've mapped the shape of it from above. We've drilled a few careful holes into the edges of it. But almost all of it is still down there in the dark, sealed away from the rest of the planet, exactly as it's been for millions of years, waiting.